I think that we've demonstrated across my entire leadership team a sense of vulnerability and willingness to speak to truth. When things are hard, when there is a challenge, we speak about it. And we try and collectively own the challenge. If there's a customer who is angry at us because we couldn't install fast enough or whatever it might be, it's not because the CS team wasn't available that day. It's because we as a group need to figure out a better process to more effectively respond to that customer's demand.
Right.
It enables them to have confidence that they can bring a challenge to the table and then be supported in solving it.
Greg, welcome to Tech Scenes Unplugged.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, let's start from the top. Tell me about Shadowbox.
All right. So Shadowbox is a breakthrough technology that is focused on addressing the challenge of interoperability, primarily in healthcare, but really beyond. If you think about it, pretty much every person, every business utilizes one or more SaaS applications. The data lives within that application. It's their main system of record, but they have to move that data from point A to point B, C, D, E, and F. And
Right.
Shadowbox was designed or developed out of my prior role as an executive at a large diagnostic laboratory, where we were challenged by the requirement of getting good, clean, complete, accurate data from our ordering clinicians into our ordering system, our lab information system, so that we could provide good clinical results and then, of course, get paid for it. And the traditional method of doing so, quite frankly, starts with paper and fax. You may be surprised to know, or maybe not, that 9 out of 10 doctors still use a fax machine to order their ancillary services. In this day and age, hello, 1996.
Right.
But the alternative to that is really an electronic health record or EHR vendor assigning an analyst to then meet with a lab information system analyst or some third party to then code between them to the quality and requirements that are required for data integrity, data quality within healthcare, which is extremely expensive, extremely time consuming. And given the fact that there are so many factors that result in a failure of receiving any ROI on that investment, there needs to be better ways. And there are many companies that are trying to address this. Most of them are focused on APIs and hub and spokes. And what Shadowbox has done, so I'm finally getting to your question, Shadowbox has done is created a browser for healthcare. So think about entering as a user, authenticating into the EHR, electronic health record of your choice. You authenticate in through the Shadowbox browser versus Chrome or Safari or Edge or any of the other traditional commercial browsers. And what happens when that person logs in is it enables the technology of Shadowbox to read what's called the document object model of the underlying application, which is the table of contents of that application and the endpoints related to it. And then with a script, extract discreetly text, images, files, whatever it may be, and move it within the Shadowbox browser securely and compliantly to wherever else it needs to go, point A, B, D, C, E, and F. So that's the technology at its core. We were founded in 2017, first customer late 2018, venture funded in 23, and growing by leaps and bounds, and excited to be a part of this conversation to share more.
So you guys were founded in 17 and then venture backed in 23. So you went quite a few years. Were you self-funding it, or, what did that look like?
It was quite an adventure. So the circumstances were that had an idea, had a technology, but the technology was not built for the use case that made sense to investors, institutional investors out there.
Okay.
And so the first feedback we would get is, well, first of all, there's no way that technology will work. So we had to
Right.
prove that the tech would work. The second thing is that, well, okay, so maybe it works, but who's going to actually use it? Because they want to instead use what they're used to. And so there's this change management.
Right.
And so then we had to prove that people would actually use it. And then the third sort of thing was, well, who's going to pay for it when they can just access Google Chrome or Safari or whatever for free? And so we had to prove that people would pay for it. And so along that process, we initially started bootstrapping, and then we went out to friends and family, and we raised through a convertible note. And it really took until we had a lot of iteration and had demonstrated product market fit and had survived COVID onset and then COVID removal, like the whole 100-year storm in healthcare, before we demonstrated that there was significant value for the technology and the use case, and that there was tremendous room to run. And I think really that was the difference, is being able to speak to venture capitalists, institutional investors from hey, we're not just a point-to-point solution or a very small solution. We actually are laying the groundwork for addressing a fundamental problem in healthcare, which is this $950 billion interoperability challenge.
Right. And that's really administration costs, right? Like that's that 950.
Almost entirely movement of paper from point A to point, or let me rephrase that, data from point A to point B, and all the friction that is generated because it isn't done efficiently. A huge chunk of that is around health insurance companies' prior authorization or pre-authorization services. So if a health insurance company doesn't get the clinical data they need, diagnosis codes, insurance information, medical notes, other forms of demonstrating medical necessity, they aren't going to approve the procedure, the medication, whatever it may be. And that creates friction because the clinician who says, my patient needs this now, is now spending time throughout the chain trying to answer questions for an insurance company so they can authorize it. And that happens throughout healthcare. So prior authorizations is a huge point of friction, and that is a big chunk of it. There's actually some really wonderful testimony. There's a Harvard professor that spoke before the U.S. Senate Budget Committee, and I'm blanking on his name. I'll have to send it to you. But late last year, where he really broke down what that $950 billion amounts to.
Yeah. So that's a huge number. That's a huge number. And you guys are solving this through browser as an API. That seems really unique. I mean, are there other people solving other problems using browser as an API that you've seen out there?
I haven't seen it. I mean, quite frankly, in my observation, in my research, the last real innovation in the browser was the tab. And when was that? Like 1995? Like so. But part of that is there has been this evolution of solutions from being on-premise to the cloud, and from being application-driven to SaaS-driven. And so I think that what we are seeing in Shadowbox and our utilization and our growth and our adoption is really just more relevant to what's happening broadly across the technical community. In fact, when we first started pitching Shadowbox, we were pitching it as a browser for business or a browser for healthcare.
Right.
And again, I told you all the things that were challenges in that pitch. But in that interim time, a whole category of applications have grown up, and it's called the enterprise browser. Enterprise browser is a platform. There are a number of companies that are providing a whole suite of services based around the browser. And it's about compliance. It's about distribution. It's about orphan SaaS applications that are sitting there where you're paying a monthly fee and nobody's using it. It's about so many of these things. And what Shadowbox adds to that conversation is the ability to, using the browser as an API, to be able to then create interoperability at scale. So you have your solution that is your system of record, whatever it may be, like healthcare, it's the EHR, and you need to open up dozens of other applications to move data in and out. There's a whole field of digital therapeutics, digital healthcare, and the number one thing that they need is access to patient data securely, compliantly. They cannot do that efficiently if they're going to go API to this EHR, API to this EHR, and so on. There's 30 different EHRs, and sometimes they don't have the ability to do APIs, or even where one EHR in particular, the biggest one in the industry, has advertised that they have 70 different APIs available. Well, if you're an outside organization trying to enter a market as efficiently as possible, trying to program and maintain to all these literally thousands of APIs and manage this whole Frankenstein on the back end, it's a disaster. So our solution is drop a Shadowbox on top of the system of record and then extract that data at scale. So every single person who's using the Athena EHR, the ClinicalWorks EHR, the Practice Fusion EHR, you name it, is able to, with the same application, be able to extract in the exact same use workflow, the exact same in the exact same workflow, to be able to extract that data and move it to where they need it to go.
With healthcare, I've done a lot of work within healthcare over the years. They don't move very quickly, right? Oftentimes they don't. And I believe, after COVID too, there's so much change that happened during COVID within healthcare. It felt like the pause button was hit with healthcare, right? Acquiring new systems, making any sort of change, because they were still dealing with how much change was thrown at them. How did you navigate that time from a sales process and like sales focus? And, I always kind of look at every organization, every functional area of the organization is like trying to dial in the organization, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work so they can focus on what works. What did that look like from a sales perspective for you guys, going from 2017 to 2025?
Well, during when COVID hit, we were excited because we felt that we had a unique and different way to approach the very important and critical needs. And we put together a network of in our space that we knew where our initial go-to-market was in diagnostic labs, which is the heart and soul of testing for COVID. Do you have it? Do you not? And we put together a network of labs that would be willing to accept specimens based upon their capacity. And we took this idea to a very large organization called Seegene, and they provide all sorts of machines and equipment and so on for laboratories. And we put a coalition together, and we actually pitched the federal government on their large contract to provide for the government the ability to essentially crowdsource capacity and send specimens wherever it needed to go. We didn't win the contract, but by being involved at that level and engaged in those conversations, it enabled us to have, as a very small, very young organization with only, quite frankly, a handful of referenceable customers, to be able to go to others and say, we're a part of this. This huge company sees the value we could provide, and we want you to be a part of it. And so even though we ultimately didn't succeed in that network that, quite frankly, I thought would have been a really effective way of addressing the challenges at the time, it gave us the opportunity to build relationships and trust to enable those companies that said, oh, we're surviving COVID, we're doing COVID, but now we need to do outreach to our clinicians again. And why don't we turn to Shadowbox, because they have a unique and a very cost-effective means of addressing that.
That's interesting. Going forward motion always seems to really solve problems, right? Like going for that, even though you didn't get it, brought you to the next thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, you mentioned the change in healthcare seems to be, a challenge. You mentioned the word change, and of course, 2024 January, there was a massive hack with that for Change Healthcare, and our hearts go out to the people that work there and all of the people who have been affected. It is definitely, a massive disruption to the industry, and it has put such a huge focus on security and all the challenges around that. But part of the value prop or what we learned from that is that it wasn't necessarily by design. It is, however, by outcome, that our architecture, a Shadowbox, is a distributed architecture rather than a centralized architecture, which means that, whereas when change went down, nothing happened. Nothing could happen. It was until they were able to reset all their systems, which they did as efficiently as they could. But Shadowbox, if one of the application, one of the users is compromised, that's as far as it goes, because they will no longer be able to authenticate into their system. That doesn't affect anybody upstream or downstream from them. So Shadowbox, by being distributed to an application that as a browser that sits on a desktop that requires authentication both for the user into their system of record as well as into the ordering for the other destination, we actually have created a really effective way of addressing some of the security and compliance concerns that folks might have when they're going out and otherwise doing direct integrations or creating APIs where there's vulnerabilities on the back end that have become systemic versus something that might break at the front end, and it's obvious and specific and it doesn't affect the system.
Yeah. That's knowing that it makes a huge difference, right?
It gives, we are ever vigilant and ever focused. We're a SOC 2 Type 2 compliant company, and security and compliance are at the top of our agenda in every conversation we have. But it gives us some comfort to know that the architecture is by itself a reinforcing security arrangement.
Yeah, that's awesome. Changing gears a little bit, I'd love to think about it's been 8 years since you started the company. Looking back, what are those lessons you wish you would have learned quicker or faster? Or one of those things that was a challenge, but you wish you could have figured it out much faster than you did?
We don't have time on this podcast to go through all the things that I have learned, but I will tell you that it might be easier for me to tell you the things that I think worked well.
Yeah.
Because I have made so many mistakes and I can write books about it. But the things that I think worked well, and I would recommend to any entrepreneur, is really sort of maybe three things. Number one, I think you have to treat your business with integrity. And by that, I mean that when you want to build a business that has an impact versus building a business that you just want to transact, make money, and sell, it changes the way in which you address everything. Every decision you make is different. And so when you have that core level of, I'm doing this because I want to make a difference, I want to make an improvement, I want to change the world, whatever whatever is behind the scenes of why you're doing something, it infuses the entire team to think in that same way. And so it enables us to be able to tell, to focus on the long run and to focus our relationships on the long run. So number one is sort of that integrity to purpose.
Yep.
At number two is, I think that, and it's a part of this is starting with the end in mind, and it's related to that. So you want to make sure that, again, you can't do everything that you want to do with the resources you have. So what is the highest priority for the resources you have today to be able to get you just a little bit closer? Yeah. And then the third thing falls on top of that, which I think is encouraging your team to celebrate all those little wins. The hardest thing about being I think about being in a startup is the fact that it feels like it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, and then the next day it's 1 step forward and 3 steps back. Right. It's just a roller coaster. And so being able to celebrate that, we signed a customer. Hey, we kept a customer, or we grew a customer from 1 installation to 30, or these tiny little things make such a huge difference when you've got to try and keep a team who's underpaid, who's overworked, who are really believing in what you're trying to accomplish. I think those are kind of the 3 things that have enabled our team to stay together through this, like I said, the 100-year storm of COVID, and then the pulling back of all the dollars there, and change healthcare. I mean, and right now here we are in 2025, and the federal government is talking about cutting, up to $900 billion. I think that was the last number I saw, out of healthcare over the next 10 years. So there is constant disruption at a macro level that if you're not thinking about what you're doing at the micro level, it's so easy to give up. And
Yeah.
we are grit and fighters, and we don't give up.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that's one of the core behaviors of the teams that we work with. And Peak is, and you said it really well. I like to think of like that mission, that why, that cause, that purpose or belief is one of those focal points that we really need, because we can really ask ourselves when we're questioning what to do or what not to do, is like, does that fulfill that why? Are we moving in the right direction? And then we build the 3-year vision and a 1-year plan to kind of create that alignment. But you kind of said it in a different way, like reverse engineering to where we know we want to go and what we need to do today. But if you have those focal points as a team, I think it really helps the team know where they're going, right? It helps the team know what they need to do and what's most important right now. So those focal points create focus. And I think that's so important. And then the last piece I think is so important too, and I think a lot of people miss it, is you need to celebrate those wins. And, I'm guilty of this. I've been guilty of this with companies even before Collective Genius. I did this. But when you really have that mentality to go, 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 it's hard to sometimes just stop and be present and be, grateful and thankful for the things that you have done. And the team needs that. Otherwise, I mean, you only have so much, like you said, you only have so much capital. You only have so much time, but the team also only has so much energy, right? You could have all the capital in the world, all the time in the world, and if your team has no energy, you can't do anything. And so I think that's a resource that a lot of people forget, is like how much energy your team has, and they need to be replenished with that energy. And you get energy from wins, right? Teams that lose over and over again, or teams that win over and over again don't recognize they're winning. I think their energy just gets depleted, and they just feel like, eventually they get to the point of saying, okay, I'm going to take that call from that recruiter and see what else is out there. You know what I mean? And, and you kind of, if you don't have that alignment, I think that happens too, where you feel like I'm not really contributing, or I don't know what to contribute to. That's a loss of energy, I think, at times too.
Yeah, you're hitting on a really important point, especially for in this day and age, and for Shadowbox, where we're 100% remote. We do have a core group of folks that are in the San Diego, Southern California region, but we have employees all across the country now. And so it's really important for us as a leadership team to focus on promoting and encouraging culture and alignment and engagement across the team. So we do things that seem sort of simple, like we do every other week. We have a jukebox where we use, everybody, there's some theme for the week, and everybody contributes a song, and sometimes it's a contest, guess who who suggested the song, and it's themes like, what's your walk-up music, or whatever. And as one example, we do an end of week call, All Hands, and every quarter we do a thing where we say, just bring an idea, personal, corporate, whatever it may be. And one of the nice ones that came out of the last time we did this was one of our teammates, newer ones, said, I'd like at these end of weeks, at least every once in a while, to leave some space at the very end for people to express some gratitude. Coming from the hard charging world that I have lived in prior to to Shadowbox, where I was the employee, not the leader, that was never the culture. It was always just, what have you done for me lately? Charge, right? But at the end of last year, we were having one of these end of week conversations, and the number of people that actually said, this is the best job I've ever had, despite everything that we've gone through, it like brought me to tears. Nobody's going to get on an end of week call and say, this is the worst job I ever had. Right. But to vocalize and to articulate why it's the best job they ever have. And to say things like, it's because I was having a rough week and somebody who's not even on my team reached out and just said, hey, anything I can help you with? Or I needed to take some time off because of a family emergency, and the team just leaned in to let me do that without feeling guilty about taking that time. And in any company, especially in a remote one, though, when we're so dispersed and we don't have that in-person connection that used to be just water cooler talk or whatever.
Right.
Without that, leadership really needs to focus on that to be successful.
Yeah. What is it that you think you guys have done that is like incorporated those behaviors?
I think that we've demonstrated from leadership across my entire leadership team, sense of vulnerability and willingness to speak to truth. When things are hard, when there is a challenge, we speak about it,
Right.
and we try and collectively own the challenge. If there's a customer who is angry at us because we couldn't install fast enough or whatever it might be, it's not because the CS team wasn't available that day. It's because we as a group need to figure out a better process to more effectively respond to that customer's demand, right?
Yep.
And so it takes the pressure off of the individual to always CYA or even worse, to say, oh, it's their fault or they're the problem.
Right.
It enables them to have confidence that they can bring a challenge to the table and then be supported in solving it.
Right. Yeah. Like implementation can be a sales problem. It could have started with a sales problem. It could be a CS problem. It could be a product problem. It could be an operational problem. I love the idea, and we embody this too. We have a weekly meeting that we do with our teams called the triage, the weekly camp meeting. But in that, we triage, and it's the most important, most urgent things that we're having issues or problems with. And we try to identify the core issue, come up with solutions, solve it, create an action item. What's the next step that we need to solve that? But the reason we do that is that collective piece of it's not one person's issue, it's all of our issue, right? And I think you said that having that kind of transparent organization and then identify these things that are not working. Typically, the fun thing about that is I've seen, finance, a CFO solve a sales problem. I've seen sales solve a technical problem. But when you get the right group together and you work collectively like a real team, right? Like I'll play your role, but collectively, get that puck in the net. That's, I think, what makes a good team. And a lot of times it's not uncommon where you find organizations that don't work that way. It's more common that the teams are working in silos, I think, or there's blame put on people, even if it's not said out loud. And I think some of the most damaging things that happen in organizations are the things that are not talked about. And I think it's really important. We do a cadence. So we do an annual session. Our teams do annual sessions and quarterly sessions. Within that, we do a survey. And that survey is just to unpack our thoughts. What's working, what's not working at the end of the day are the things that we're really looking for. We celebrate the things that are working, but we also address the biggest opportunities. And that's the things that are not working. Right? Like that's the biggest opportunities because any competitor that you're working with are having the same issues, right? And so the teams that can identify the issues and solve them are always the teams that get ahead and move forward. Even if, like you said, I love that you're like, well, I made a lot of mistakes. Well, of course you did, because nobody's ever done what you've done before. So it's hard to even say they're mistakes. You probably went down different paths that didn't work out, right? But the teams that are transparent and can identify these issues and then try to solve them are the ones I feel like always get ahead. And I think that one sales example that you use is an example that you guys went this direction. You didn't win that contract, but from that allowed you insight, sitting on top of a peak that nobody else was on, a vision that you could do something that probably other people didn't see,
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things that has been important to me as a leader is to enter every conversation with some humility, and recognize, the old saying about, what you know, and what you don't know, but you don't know what
right?
you don't know. Coming into any conversation and thinking that I have to make a decision as the CEO. And often those decisions are really just a trade-off of multiple good options, but prioritization. But not walking into that meeting already having the decision in mind, but really, I need to hear what it is, make your best case for why this is a priority over that.
Yeah.
And usually at the end of that conversation, we have consensus, and that makes those decisions a lot easier. But so along with that humility, the other challenge that I have or that I impose or request of my leadership team is to come to me with enough information so that we can make a good decision.
Right.
And to come with a recommended solution, not just a problem.
A CEO that I worked with at an early stage growth company. This has been probably back in 99, and coming in and sharing an issue and sharing how I thought we could solve it. And he looked at me and he said, "You're the first person this week that's come into this room and actually came with a solution." He's like, everybody comes in here. If you're a fly on the wall, everyone comes in here with just the problems. He's like, and that was a big insight to me. I had started and sold a business before that. So I think I was sitting in that position before me. That's why I came like that. But like, that was a big impact on me thinking about, what is it like to be a CEO at a high, fast growing, scaling company. Is you're always trying to make decisions. And if you don't have the right information, it's hard to make those decisions. So I think part of your ability to lead with humility allows other people to be transparent and humble, which allows you to really get the data and information that the team has, and nobody's holding anything back. Because the last thing that you want is someone's holding something back that's not working, and they don't want you to know that because they think it's a reflection of them. But now you don't have the right information to make the decisions that you have. And so I think that comms and that cadence of communication and creating that transparency, I'm sure has a big it's a big impact that you're leaving on the organization, and that's probably why people are happy. You feel better when you tell the truth, or you feel like you've shared what's most important to share. I think.
Yeah, you are very correct, 100% correct, in fact. And I, like most people, when there's something really challenging to speak about, there's this anxiety, there's this pressure, there's this what if, there's the unknown,
right?
And then you just say it, and not angry, not accusatory or whatever. You just say it, and without fail, after that conversation, there's just a huge relief that you're able to actually have a really hard, difficult conversation and come up with answers. Sometimes the answer is there is no answer right now. We need more info, right? Or we can't
That's
make
often.
a decision. Yeah, often, right? But that anxiety about, is this going to reflect poorly on me if I bring up something rough? I feel that even as the CEO.
Yeah. I think there's a level of confidence that you need to show in any role. And you need to show the humility too. When people say fake it till you make it, I always think, nobody will be willing to help you. And you can't do this alone. So if you're faking it and people think you got it, they're not going to help you, and you're never going to be able to do it alone. And
I think that the fake it till you make it is so transparent. Maybe it's because I'm as old as I am and have been involved in organizations as deeply as I have, but it's obvious to me when somebody is in front of me and they are speaking without knowledge, or they're obfuscating, or early on in my career was a perpetrator of some of this behavior, right? I wanted to act like I knew what I was talking about, and I would get caught not knowing what I was talking about. And that had a huge impact on how I would approach things moving forward. It was definitely a growing experience. Mm-hmm. My first job, I was a systems manager and legislative assistant for a congressman in Washington. I talk about a 180 from what I do today.
Right.
And I was expected to know everything about the issues that I managed. And for a 22-year-old or 23-year-old, telling a member of the U.S. House of Representatives whether they're pressed yes or no, you've got to really have confidence in what you're saying, and at the same time, it's a huge responsibility. And the first time I made it, I acted like I knew what I was talking about and didn't. It was extremely clear what the consequences were as a result of that. So I didn't do that again. So I was fortunate to have that early on in my career as a sort of an ethos, a very basic, mode of operation. But it has carried me forward, and it's enabled me I think to be more effective at ferreting out who actually is real on the other side of the conversation.
Yeah. It's funny. I've coached youth sports for 25 years, and I've coached teams for almost equally as long, in this venture-backed space, high-growth space. And I even see it in sports. And like, I think kids learn this early on sometimes when they have bad coaches, is they'll learn something. Like I coach wrestling. So they'll learn a move and then they go and try to do the move. And the coach goes, oh, you got to do this move. Do it. And the kid keeps on trying to do it. Well, he doesn't know it. So he's doing it wrong. And the coach is yelling at him just to do it. But the coach hasn't taught him right. The kid doesn't want to admit he doesn't know how to do it. And so I always I always feel like when I'm coaching, I hear bad coaches just telling kids, stand up, get out of that, do this. But they're not really giving like real practical advice about, like move your arm in or do this or do that. I think bad coaching as a kid will leave you with that idea that I need to know and I need to show that I know, when if they said, hey, I don't know actually how to do a single leg takedown, or I don't know this detail. And when I have kids come up to me and ask me those specific questions and I show them and then they do it again and they do it right, they get so happy. Right. And I think, I think a lot of this is kind of learned behavior or told that, do your best and, go out there. But I think that kind of transcends into organizations. And if you don't learn it early, like it looks like you did, and I had my moments too, you find like, man, life's just a lot easier when you can say, I don't know, and I see this with investors too. I see a lot of teams that, don't want to share certain information with their investors, and investors are saying, no, share everything with me so we can help you, like be transparent. Now you don't want to overload your investors with nuance that they don't need to know, but like oftentimes, some of that stuff that I think leadership teams are holding back with investors, if the investors have access and network and experience that they can help them with, it slows them down too. So I think at every stage, understanding how much you need to share and how much is nuance you don't need to share is really can hold companies back or progress them forward.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree. It's interesting you brought up sports. This is a bit of an aside, but one of the things that I think is critical, and we really impart on our team, is this work-life balance to make sure that they remain as healthy and emotionally, mentally, physically as they can be, because that's how they are productive, obviously, at work too. And the timing on this is interesting. That recording this podcast. I started studying Choi Li Foot Kung Fu when I started Shadowbox.
Oh, wow.
At the same time. I had done martial arts for a very little bit early on as a kid, but had never pursued it. But my idea here was, I'm going to be starting something where I think I know things. This is Shadowbox. Have an idea, but I know that I'm going to need to learn a lot along the way. And it's going to be challenging. And I'm going to start something outside of Shadowbox where I'm equally learning and challenged and so on. And I love the idea of the cultural aspects. I love the discipline aspects. I love the physical aspects. And so along the way, do this. And your point exactly, I just yesterday completed my second degree Brown test.
Oh, congrats.
And did so after a back injury a year or so ago that had delayed this for a long time. And throughout the sort of the rehabilitation and growth and everything, and almost relearning I had a coach, I had an instructor that would take the time to say, what you're doing has this positive, this negative, and what I need you to do to really understand and learn this is to try it this way. And then he would say, okay, well, you tried it that way, but that's not really getting to what I want to be at. Let's go back and let's look at it. Let's look at the fundamentals. And even after I took the test, the instructor was saying, all right, here's where you did well. Here's where you still need some work. But along the way, even though he had told me 30, 40, 50, 100 times the right process for doing whatever I was doing it wrong until suddenly I was doing it right. And so I'm reflecting on what you said about that and how coaches can really be effective in supporting and persevering through enabling who they are coaching, whether it's a business coach or a sports coach, right? To enable the person to actually do what they're to learn to do the right thing or how to do it the right way, versus just constantly you're not doing it right. Do it right. Do it right.
Right.
I don't know if I articulated that piece very
No,
well.
I think that drives people away. It's funny because it's been about 15 years now that I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is a form of submission grappling. And I did it to do something, one, to make myself comfortable with being uncomfortable, because all the people I work with are in uncomfortable positions. And that was part of the reason I did it. Part of the reason I did it, probably the main reason, was to not think about work and to go do something where I didn't think about work. But the reality of that is I draw parallels and analogies from jiu-jitsu all the time for my work. So it's hard not to think about work when I'm doing it. But when someone's trying to choke you, like someone was yesterday on me, I wasn't thinking about work. I was thinking about how to defend that. But I think it is a good analogy. I think it really is. And trying to understand and coach. And the thing with me, when I coach, I don't coach individuals. I'm not an executive coach. But me and my coaches coach teams. And one of the things that I just see over and over again is that these teams that I work with are brilliant at solving problems. Their biggest problem is being transparent about the problems that they actually have.
Yeah.
Because once they can identify, and we call it triage, we identify, talk about what it is, and we identify the core issue, and then we come up with solutions to solve it, and then we take an action step. When we triage, which we do every week in our weekly sessions, or they do it, I'm not with them when they do their weeklies, but that getting that behavior integrated opens up so many doors. Because again, I think it's not that they're not creative and can solve problems. It's just that we need to identify what are the biggest problems and be transparent about them and tackle them. It makes the meeting fun too, because you tackle a whole bunch of things and have next steps and get things done. That's another way to bring energy to the team, is that forward motion and solving problems. Versus a lot of teams like to talk about it over and over and over again and never solve it, but just talk about it. Those meetings that come up, and it's like, we talked about that last week and 2 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago, but we're not solving it.
We have a similar process. We do a weekly call where we briefly go over all of our metrics for the last week and our objectives for the quarter. And then we have a section of the meeting where we are just discussing challenges. And from wherever in the company, they bring it to and we prioritize it in the conversation. And then we come up with a solution. And then something that we just have been talking about recently is, all right, now that we have a solution, we need to make sure we have ownership and accountability for implementing the solution that we just talked about.
Yeah.
And because that was something that wasn't clearly articulated or defined.
Right.
It was natural, like, oh, this is a sales challenge, so our head of sales is going to be working on that.
Right.
But there are so many things in our company now that are so cross-functional that what we were finding is that one of the leaders would say, "Oh yeah, I'm on board with that solution," and then tick tock, 2 weeks later, nothing's happened. And that's because both of the leaders in the various functions were like, "Oh, I thought you were taking the lead on that." So that was just a learning that literally we've just been.
That's awesome.
Focusing on implementing.
Yeah, we call it ACT, A-C-T. So triage, we assess the situation, come up with the core issue or opportunity. C is consider solutions, and T is take action. And take action is, we actually have a triage list, and our next list over is the action list. And that's the next step that we do after we made that decision, which is really important if you have cross-functional teams. And also, we use OKRs. OKRs are great because you define the objective and key results, and then you can define who's going to own what, do what, when it's going to get done. That's how we do OKRs, a little bit different. But cross-functional teams need that structure. Otherwise, it's confusing. And then you as the CEO don't have visibility unless you have that structure. And then even worse, it's when the teams don't have that visibility. Who's helping me with this, or how do we get that done? So that's awesome that you found your way to that. Like, because I think that's a huge step. That's a huge step.
Oh, thank you.
All right. I have one final question for you. It's probably one of the most important questions you've ever been asked, so I'm glad you're sitting down. You answered all the other questions, so I think you're going to be able to nail this one. But so the question is, it's actually more of a scenario. So the final question scenario is, you're trapped on a desert island the rest of your life. Now you have food, you have water, You have everything you need, even, let's say, healthcare. Everything you need. Shadowbox is there, so you guys are really set. But one thing you don't have is any entertainment at all. There's no entertainment on the island. But luckily for you, 80s boombox drifts ashore, and it has unlimited batteries, but you can only bring one album to listen to the rest of your life. What album are you going to bring?
Wow. When you said 80s boombox, you immediately went to my hairband days. And there are so many but listening to that for the rest of my life, not so sure.
So you can go any genre, any decade, any time frame.
It'd have to be Beatles, White Album.
Oh, that is a great answer. I've had Beatles before. Nobody went straight to the White Album, but the White Album is one of my favorite albums of all time. I don't think you get sick of that too, because there's so much variety in that album too.
Exactly.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much for joining me on Tech Scenes. It's been a great talk.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I really enjoyed the conversation.